reported its sixth death, in fact. Let's discuss this further with Robert Kelly, a professor of political science at Pusan National University in South Korea. Hello to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. So South Korea's president says he's putting the country on its highest alert. So should people be worried?
Not yet. I think there's a little bit of sort of like panic and sensationalism. And the Korean media is not helping on this. I think the Korean media's coverage has been a little overwrought too. But yeah, I mean, things are getting worse faster, I think, than people thought maybe like a week or two ago, at least in one city in central Korea, right? People aren't really going to any kind of organized events in the public anymore. The government's told them to stay in their homes and stuff like that. I mean, it's not China, right, where you're hearing all kinds of stories coming out. I mean, the stuff that we're hearing, sort of the rumors coming out of China are pretty bad. I don't think South Korea is there yet, and I think they will get this under control. They did that with MERS and SARS in the past. But yeah, it's bad now.
Nevertheless, you have had a spike in cases and a doubling of infections in 24 hours.
Yeah, that's right. And so now I think a lot of people are going to change their behavior. For example, I think the protests that are common in Seoul will probably start to taper off. I think you'll see lots of sort of events that are scheduled be canceled, sort of marches and parades and marathons and things like that. Anything where you're going to have large numbers of people that congregate outside. Schools have closed next week. My kids aren't going to school next week. We have to figure out what to do with them tomorrow. But I still think that broadly speaking, this will be kept under control, right? I mean, just sort of out of perspective, right? And there are 53 million people living in South Korea and 600 people are sick. I mean, that's a pretty vanishingly small number.
You sound fairly relaxed about this, but I can tell from the tone of your voice that things have the potential to get worse, and clearly there might be more cause for concern.
Yeah, I am actually fairly relaxed about this. I mean, in part because, Korea's got a pretty modern healthcare system that's grappled these kinds of things in the past, right? I mean, there's a Middle East respiratory syndrome, MERS, a couple years ago that the Korean government responded to very, very well. Did the same with bird flu and SARS in the past. So I'm actually not that concerned about it yet. Like I said, I think there's a little bit more panic than is helpful. They're showing, sort of like zombie movies on television and stuff like that here. I mean, it's just not really helpful. And people are still doing their thing. I mean, they're still going to the store and getting on subways and stuff like that. I mean, you don't see, people avoiding public transportation yet and stuff like that.
What's the general atmosphere then like where you are?
Well, here where I am in the south, I'm in the southeast. I'm in Busan, and here I think there's only a couple of cases. I think where the real issue now is in the city of Daegu, where you may have heard, your viewers may have heard that there was a huge explosion of cases over the weekend related to a church, related to sort of a cult sect whose members refused to participate and simply avoided government warnings. And now there's quite a severe cluster there. And there you hear stories about how it's like a ghost town and whole sections of the city are empty and people are staying home and stuff like that. But where I am, it's not that bad yet. It's really in the capital and in Daegu where it's the worst.
Yeah, and well, let's talk about Daegu then, because you're able to offer some perspective. As we see, this cluster is connected to this church, and we know that in the UK, the Foreign Office has advised British nationals not to go there unless it's absolutely necessary. So yet again, authorities issuing advice, clearly because there is cause for concern.
Yeah, that's right. And the South Korean government's doing the same thing, right? They elevated the national alert level to the highest rating today. And the Korean government has really warned very strongly against people doing all kinds of things outside in any kind of large congregation. I mean, the real trick, of course, is that, Korea's not China, right? It's not an authoritarian state. You can't just simply lock people up. You can't just simply close people in their homes and shut down public transportation and not allow people to leave the cities and stuff like that. And that's, I think, really the interesting sort of political or legal issue in the background, right, as the government struggles to deal with this, right? I mean, just how many personal freedoms can you take away? Japan has locked those people on that ship now for a couple of weeks. That's a pretty severe response. I mean, those people are basically stuck there, right? And I think the South Korean government's trying to avoid doing something that draconian. But, if you and I are still having this conversation in a week, yeah, you're going to see a lot stricter, tougher measures.
Well, what kind of measures will be put in place for somebody who is suspected of having the coronavirus in South Korea? You say the healthcare system seems fairly good.
Yeah, I mean, Korea is actually a destination for medical tourism, right? It's really actually the real issue isn't so much dealing with the patients, right? The real issue is actually tracking them down, again, because it's an open society, right? And you can't hunt people down because they're coughing. I mean, there are limits to what you want the state to do in these kinds of things. And that's actually become one of the issues with the church in Daegu, right? I mean, there's something like 9,000 members, and the government's talked about quarantining them all. And so now they're complaining. And are they going to get a lawyer? Is this thing going to go to court? I mean, it's kind of a tangle. But right now, I mean, the government, like I said, the government is sort of enacting national emergency rules that allow it to begin to abridge some of these freedoms and then, if necessary, perhaps quarantine people against their will. The government hasn't quite taken that step yet. But again, if you and I are having this conversation in a week or so, if people start slapping travel bans against Korea, and I have the feeling that's coming, then yeah, you'll start to see that too.
And the antivirus alert level has been stepped up to red, hasn't it? That is the highest. So again, authorities, I guess, keen to be seen that they're taking precautions where necessary.
Yeah, and they are. I mean, I'm getting all these alerts on my phone all the time, and the government tells you to do this and that, and there's all kinds of stuff on TV, and then the elevators of buildings you go into telling you to wash your hands and not touch your face so much, all this kind of stuff. Any major public facility you go into, the very first thing they do is have someone there with hand sanitizer. Like I said, schools have been closed. My own university's start date has been pushed back by a couple of weeks. And the government is actually making a pretty major effort to do this. But again, I mean, it's an interesting debate politically, at least for sort of what I do in political science, to watch how far the government can push people without actually forcing them, right? I mean, that's really the big sort of legal issue looming in the background, right? Can you actually coerce people to stay in their homes and things like that and not leave cities? And I think the government's just really, really wary about doing that.
All right, well, we'll see how it all pans out. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today.